Yeah, 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 I run my fingers through her hair as she smiles and says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you lusting is the one you're loving?
I've interviewed a lot of people who have lived through a civil war, and they all say the same thing. They didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming. Brina Kovac was a young mother living in Sarajevo at the beginning of the Bosnian Civil War. She told me that in the months and weeks leading up to that war, life seemed normal. She went to work. She took weekend holidays with her husband. They went to the weddings of their friends. But then one night in March of 1992, when she was at home with her newborn son, the lights suddenly went out. And then she said, you started to hear machine guns. It doesn't have to be this way. We know an enormous amount about why these terrible wars start. We know that the people intent on violence have a playbook. We know what that playbook is. But there's no reason why we, the democracy-loving people of this world, can't create our own playbook to prevent civil war. But to do that, we have to be brave enough to fight for real democracy, strong democracy, because only by fighting for democracy can we ensure that we will truly get peace. Thank you.
Are we brave enough? And is democracy what we're fighting for? Let's have this conversation today. Let me welcome the author of How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. Let me welcome the great Dr. Barbara F. Walter. Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. I'm thrilled to be here. And hello, everybody out there.
Yes, in Radio Land. First of all, we were talking off mic about being Catholic schoolgirls, and I asked you when you graduated from that very interesting titled high school. Will you repeat what the name of your high school?
My high school's name was School of the Holy Child Jesus.
The School of the Holy Child Jesus. When you left there, what did you aspire to be?
Oh, and I was laughing when Karen asked me that question. Nobody has ever asked me that. And so I actually have to think. I'm trying to put myself back into my 16-year-old self and think about that. My parents were immigrants. We grew up poor. Life was a struggle. And all they wanted for their kids is to get an education and then for us to get jobs and for us to start making money so that it wasn't such a struggle anymore. And so in my mind, what I really thought about is I want the future to be free of financial worries. I didn't want that to consume so much of my energy. And I know I grew up just outside of New York City in a city called Yonkers, and people worked in Manhattan. And I was like, oh, that seems like a good place to go. My parents wanted me to go into business. So when I graduated from college, I moved to New York City and I worked in advertising for 4 years. And that made my parents very happy and it made me really miserable. And so after about 4 years, I thought, oh, this is really not what I want to do. What do I really want to do? And I thought I really want to do research and I really want to write. And to do that, you have to get a PhD, which made my parents very unhappy because that to them meant I wasn't earning anything and they couldn't pay for school. And academics, they in their mind didn't really make a lot of money. And that's where I went. I have an older sister. She went to Wall Street. I went into academia. And I mean, luckily it worked out quite well.
Yes, I was going to say.
Choice for me.
They didn't know when you follow your heart, it rarely fails you. Yeah. Barbara F. Walter, immigrated from which country?
My dad came from Germany. He lived through World War II in Germany. My mom came from Switzerland. She lived through World War II there. Yes. So they're both kids of World War II.
Oh, the stories. I have questions. I have questions. I'm gonna save them for later though, because I want to get into, you kept saying democracy, and we don't really have a democracy. I don't know if we ever had a democracy. And so I've been pondering this question about Civil War for a minute since, the Confederate flag. And I'm like, why are they flying a Confederate flag? Didn't that side lose? And I said, maybe they know something we don't know. And I feel like they know something we don't know, that was just a battle, that the actual war was never finished and we're in it now. Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing, Dr. Walter?
Oh my gosh, Karen, there's so many things that you just put out there. The two big things are we really a democracy? And the second thing is, are we still fighting the Civil War? And I'm going to take the first question. Are we really a democracy? Yes, we are, but we're not as strong as Americans think we are. Americans have this sense that we are the world's greatest democracy, that we are the model democracy that everybody else should emulate. And the truth is, no, nobody should emulate our democracy. We have a weak, crappy, unique democracy that has many, many undemocratic features. What's great about our democracy is that we were the first one. We brought democracy to the world. If you don't count the odd democracy that the Greeks initiated. We were the first modern democracy. We were this great experiment in democracy, and that has served an incredible purpose. But the 1780s version of democracy that we created is not a democracy that you want in the 21st century. And the reason we have all these undemocratic features is because in order to get that democracy, in order to drag all of these different entities and states into this United States of America, the federal government had to make all of these compromises. And many of those compromises were with the southern states that wanted slavery more than they wanted anything else. And so we really don't have a system that's one person, one vote. We never have had that system. It got better in the 1960s. The Civil Rights Act was incredibly important. It finally gave African Americans the right to vote. But that right is being kind of taken away as well. So we have a democracy, but boy, it could be so much better than what it is. And then the second question, Karen, you should interrupt me anytime you want.
No, don't worry. I'm very adept at that. But my style is I bring people on who know things so that they can inform us. I don't need to interrupt you when you're saying great things. So or things that we need to know. So keep going. Keep going.
So, and then the question is, are we still fighting the first Civil War? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And I think this is a surprise to most white Americans. I think if you're African American in this country, you have seen things that people like me, white Americans, have not seen, because we do, in some respects, live in different worlds and we have different experiences. White Americans underestimate the role that slavery has played in not just the history of our country, but in our political institutions, in how power is distributed in this country, who wins, who loses, who's dominant, who's not. And that has been a constant battle. And when you look back, even in the last few years, when the Supreme Court ruled that we no longer needed the Voting Rights Act, this was, I think, during President Obama's term. The argument of the majority of judges on the Supreme Court who ruled that we didn't need that anymore, their argument was basically that we're in a post-racial society, that the weaker members of our society, the underrepresented minorities in our society, no longer needed protections because the majority would not take advantage of them anymore. That was something that happened.
No, I think the argument was we have a Black president. So that proves, no, I mean, a majority of white Americans voted for a black man twice. So why do we need protection? Clearly, there's no race problem. We're post-racial. There's a black man as a president.
Yes.
In spite everything that we wanted to do to make him one term and to destroy him, he got elected again by those same white people. So clearly, there's no race problem in America. And then the Tea Party said, "Hold my beer. We're gonna give you Trump." Yeah, watch what we do.
And that's absolutely right. And what happened almost immediately is that the old Confederate states, Alabama and Mississippi, and all of them almost immediately began instituting rules at the state level that would make it harder for their citizens to vote. And they did it strategically. And it essentially had the effect of making it much harder for people, for example, in cities to vote, for poorer people to vote. And that disproportionately affected Democrats and in particular African Americans. And that was done quite consciously. So this notion that we're in this, the Civil War is only a vestige of history and we have evolved far beyond that. We have evolved in certain ways, but race is still very much a part of our politics.
And so I wanted to land there because you identify, I think Barbara Walter is here. And this is sort of like my parlor trick because I asked this question of people who identify with being white. What does that mean to you? What does that mean? Because I feel like that's the crux this is the problem, that we identify with a system that was founded and rooted in oppressing people and building this very structure that needs to come down and be dismantled, but it can't as long as people identify with it. So I see you looking around.
Yeah.
Have you been not asked that question before?
So I was like, no, I've never been asked that question. What does it mean for me to be white? And your listeners can't see me. I mean, I look like a little Swiss farm girl. I come from a long line of dairy farmers in Switzerland in the mountains.
You're healthy too. They fought all kind of disease messing with them cows' udders. But continue. Yes.
So what does it mean for me to be white? And I'm going to say for me to be white in America. And I take that very seriously. And it means that I have a responsibility. Right?
Nope. No.
You don't know what I'm about to say.
Okay. All right. But I see where I'm asking like a stripped down fundamental question. Like there's an identity attached to that. I'm not talking academia and what your responsibility is, because I can't see your responsibility, right? Okay. You said white Americans and I'm white. That means something, or you wouldn't have. You see what I'm saying? It means something, and it doesn't mean I have a responsibility to make things fair, because it doesn't mean that.
What does it mean? I guess I'm not quite understood. What does it mean to me? I mean, I actually,
and I don't want you to struggle with it. I want you to really think about it, because I feel like until we can answer that question, across the board, because usually when I ask that question of someone who calls up, they're like, well, what does it mean to be black? I've said it's the juxtaposition to whiteness. I'd be very happy to give up the blackness. It's now a power tool. It's now something that is politically something I am wedded to, and I can talk about it, but it's really about fighting oppression. My blackness is in opposition to this power structure. So if we can't get average American citizens to say this thing called whiteness is a made up construct, and I'm not buying into it, we're all people and humans. So we're not fighting for democracy. We should be fighting for humanity.
Okay. So you know what whiteness means to me, and I feel this. It's privilege. Like life is easier for me because I'm white and I look the way I do. And I grew up speaking German, right? Nobody would have known that. Like if I had been from Jamaica and my native language was English, but I had an accent, I would be treated very differently. So whiteness to me is privilege. It's in some ways ease. But now I'm going to get back to what I was going to say. But I also feel very strongly that because of that, I have the added responsibility to fix a system, because it's easier for somebody who looks like me to try to fix the system from the inside than for other people who feel their Blackness in contrast to the dominant race and the dominant religion. It's much easier for me to fix it from the inside than from people to who are already being oppressed. So I feel like, yeah, I know, I've had it easier because of the way I looked. If my parents had come from Kenya, I would have had a very different life, and not Switzerland.
Unless you were Barack Obama. So I feel like even when we talk about race, we paint ourselves into a corner that makes it difficult for us to have the larger conversation, because even that, I'm asking myself, how do you know that you've had it easier? Because there's some Americans that live in Appalachia, in Owsley, Kentucky. The poorest counties in our country are 95 to 99% white. They will argue, I don't have health care or teeth. And I would argue, you keep voting your whiteness. That's why you don't have health care in your teeth. You're so concerned about your identity that you aren't even looking at the policies that are constantly oppressing you. Most people in this country on welfare are white, but we don't have this discussion because we're rooted in this thing. So how do you know you've had it easier?
Well, I mean, I went to school on the South Side of Chicago, and I grew up in Yonkers, and I'm a city girl. But if you live in the South Side of Chicago, you see how the cops treat you, and you see how the cops treat African Americans, and there's no comparison. There's no comparison. I saw cops beat up kids on the street for no reason, and I'm sure if I did the same thing, nothing would have happened to me. So that my experience is urban city America. I don't know rural America. I do agree with you that many people in rural America are voting against their interests, that they've been duped to support people who don't want to provide them with much needed services, who don't want to invest in education in their communities or healthcare in their communities. And they've been duped because they've been told that, America is being taken away from them and immigrants are coming in, and so I do agree with that story. But my story is more of what I've seen in urban America.
Barbara Walter. I know you get probably confused with Baba Wawa a lot. Barbara F. Walter. Dr. Walter is here. The book is How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. And I brought you here. Now, I'm going to move away a little bit from this, but this has to be an entry point of conversation that we have with one another, because until, I read somewhere that if you ask the brain a question, it has to search for an answer. And so we have to keep these questions in the forefront so that folk can search in themselves. I ask my students this: why are you Muslim? Why are you Christian? Why are you like, you have to have the why built into and it can't be this rote memorized, response. You have to really think like, why? Oh, I'm Christian because my parents were Christian. All right. I'm Catholic because but what's your relationship? What's your relationship to being white? What is your relationship to being like? We should ask these questions. So I'm grateful that you at least, indulge. But the Civil War is something that's going to impact all of us, right? So this is why I want to focus less on democracy, because for many of us, that has become like race. Progressives, the left and the right, it's become these talking points and not real things. You said ideology versus identity. And I'm like, yes. So how do we get people to start seeing one another as human beings on the same planet with the same resources, air, water? We all need it. Why do we want to deny anyone those things? Don't we want these inalienable rights for all people? Oh, you're an American, you're not American, you came through a border, but you don't deserve to have like water and a house or housing and food. So how do we get people there to just say, oh, you're a person?
So I'm a researcher, and when people ask me questions like this, I go and see what does the wealth of research say that we have and that we've been collecting now for hundreds of years, and there have been all these experiments about what brings people together. When you have a society that's highly divided, and that could be along racial, religious, or ideological lines, how do you bring them back? And contact makes a huge difference. The more people interact with each other, the more they talk to each other, the more they see each other as human beings with the same, the same problems, the same challenges. Our similarities are so much greater than our differences, but you only tend to see those similarities if you're actually interacting. And what's been happening in this country over decades has been leading to a society where we interact less with each other, not more. So, the great movement or the great hollowing out of middle America, people, leaving the small towns and going to cities and going to the coasts for education and for jobs, has also had this selection effect. It tends to be the selection effect where the more, the people who've moved away become more liberal and the people who stay are increasingly conservative. That means that liberals and conservatives are not interacting with each other as much as they used to. And then when you think about social media, right? Social media and in particular, the algorithms that have been designed to feed people not only stuff that will capture their attention, which tends to be the more negative, the more emotional material, stuff that makes you angry and fearful and feel threatened. But it also feeds you material that coincides with your existing beliefs. So people are increasingly not even interacting with each other online, because if you begin with slightly different views or you come from different groups, the algorithms will feed you quite different material. There was this great example that I heard somewhere where if I'm sitting here in California and I go to Google and I type in the search engine, climate change is, Google will give you those 5 suggestions of how to fill it in, but it will all be liberal oriented suggestions. Climate change is bad. Climate change is happening. Climate change needs to be addressed now. But if you type in that same prompt into Google in Arkansas, in rural Arkansas, you will get the automatic fill-ins from Google will be climate change is not real. Climate change is a hoax. This is not bringing people together. And then when you add the third element, which is COVID, COVID, where we all basically spent 2 years isolated in our own homes. And if we did go outside, we were wearing masks and we were not interacting. That just compounded an already socially detrimental pattern that we've been seeing. So again, how do we bring this country together again? We start interacting. We start, I wish I could
I'm
say
breathing.
Yeah. No, it's not going to happen. Okay.
No, right. That's what I'm saying. It's not. Barbara F. Walter is here. 2022 Peacemaker of the Year Award. She won that. She also is a professor. She wrote a book called How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. It's compelling. She has a TED Talk about it. And I believe I brought her on because I believe that we're still in this war. And I'm not sure if we should be fighting it. You say you want to fix it. Maybe it needs to run its course. And what happens in civil wars? Like I know people get hurt. Like I don't want anyone to be hurt, but like maybe it's time for this thing to fall.
So there, I'm going to really disagree with you. People ask me, how does somebody, make their life's work studying war? And my answer is the thing I care more about than anything else in this world is peace, 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 peace. If you care about peace, you have to understand war. And in particular, you have to understand how to prevent them and how to stop them once they start. I picked civil wars because if you look at all the forms of political violence out there, if you look at all the different types of wars, the most damaging, the most brutal are civil wars. They kill more people, a lot more people than any other type of war. They last longer than any type of war. They tend to resist negotiated settlement. They tend to be fought until one side is completely decimated, the other. It takes years for countries, decades for countries to recover from civil wars. They are more brutal than people can ever imagine. And so I do think that countries and societies can get frustrated and then and sort of throw their hands up and say, okay, let's just burn this whole thing down. But that is the absolute worst outcome you could ever get. There are compromises and there are solutions that are short of that actually work a fair amount of the time. Like, you do not, once you start a civil war, they are so hard to end. And they,
that was my point. We're still in it. I look fast forward, we had the abolition of slavery out of that, but it had a but clause that then it filled with now we currently incarcerate more people than any nation, any industrialized nation, any sane nation. 1.2, I think, million people are incarcerated. 38% of them are disproportionately Black, right?
Yeah.
That has done irreparable harm to our community. The things that they are incarcerated for have been codified in the law. Things like, scheduling crack cocaine at a much more penalized space than regular powder cocaine because of who you then flooded the neighborhoods. You Nixon first with the Ehrlichman domestic policy, and then you followed up with Reagan said, "Hold my beer." And put a war on drugs, which was really a war on Black people. So there's already been this 200-300 year from enslavement, this little period of Reconstruction that got everything that the folk wanted, the South wanted, they got back, and then they didn't have to take care of the people. Noam Chomsky has this amazing video that I'm going to play a portion of it, where he literally talked about how, after slavery, it was better because then you can incarcerate people for loitering, and then build, in Louisiana, they have people picking cotton today. Yeah. So one would argue, Dr. Walter, that, this is a very long civil war that there's no end to. So there has to be an end.
So, I mean, I would say we since 1865, we've been in a period of heavy repression where this, especially individual states, but at times the federal government as well, has heavily repressed the African-American community. But that repression is different from civil war. It's bad, but civil war is worse. And so when I talk about, how civil wars start, oftentimes, how civil wars start, it's really when people start, when two groups are this is interesting. When
you sit with it, I want to have you back because I want you to think about it, because you think deeply, and I feel like we don't ask the right questions because journalism is dead. So we don't have people asking the questions. Everything's performative and about the click. So folk come on, they pitch their books, they got the 2-minute segments, and folk don't even know how to have this conversation because they don't have the background, the intelligence. And I'm not saying I'm super intelligent, but I've been doing this for 30 years, so I know how to ask questions. And it's just frustrating when I watch, like, we can't get to the bottom of it because we don't even have a conversation. To your point, 3/4 of so-called white people self-segregate. So when you talk about if people would just come together, they run to be away. They don't have relationships with anyone Black. This is an NBC poll that started me on this journey of even like, why do you segregate? I had this conversation with Reed Galen in Utah, and he was talking about coming together. I said, you live in Utah, sir. You live in Utah. How many Black people in Utah? Like, your kids don't have any relationship, but you want to talk about coming together. You self-segregated. You wanted to do something. At least you went to the South Side of Chicago. So I'm just like, it's frustrating if I feel like we're being gaslit and no one's really, I don't want to be, hyperbolic, but like, maybe it's time for this thing to fall. It was rooted in something really not true, that all men are created equal, endowed by these inalienable rights, because the framers of the Constitution never imagined me or my mother or my grandmother or my grandfather outside of chattel. So,
well, let me ask you two questions. When you say it's time for this thing to fall, what do you mean by this thing? And when you say it's time for this thing to fall, what do you envision happening after that? Like, what do you build in its stead?
Okay. This fake democracy and all of the myths around it, You know, George Washington couldn't tell a lie, cut down a cherry tree, wouldn't. All of the things that make this country great built on a lie. So let's tell the truth. So when I say let's dismantle the education system,
Okay. Yeah.
books, all of that. Stop all of this CRT business. That's a law school practice. Not even, it's like y'all are lying. Okay, let's dismantle that. And in its place, and I don't want to sound like a socialist, but there shouldn't be a space in this country. We have enough land for everybody to have a house. Let's have real leaders that care enough about people so that we can build. Oh, there's Montana, North and South Dakota. Y'all get 2 senators. So there's 6 senators in a space that barely has 1 million people, and DC is not a state. Let's make this balance. Let's remove the electoral college, get rid of that, rooted in the 3/5 compromise. And let's really have one voice, because we have 100 million people that don't feel part of this system, that sat out the last election. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them, because everyone should participate in this thing if we really are a democracy, which we're not.
Yes. Yes. So
let's stop
you
lying.
believe in democracy. What I worry about is when you hear people saying, clear the swamp or burn this down. They want to get rid of democracy, and they want to get rid of
Black and brown people.
Well,
Let's
and
tell
I'll
the
tell
truth.
you,
They don't care about democracy.
No, and they want to get rid of democracy because
So that they
then
get rid of Black and
they
brown
can-
people.
Yeah, well, then they can create, an authoritarian a government and ensure that white Christians continue to rule in the United States despite the wide demographic change that's happening. They want
That
to
part,
cement
yes.
in white rule.
Yes, and you got to put air quotes around Christian, because the Jesus that I know would not do any of the things that these folk are doing, including have all white church. 866-801-8255. That's some BS.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I run my fingers through her hair as she smiles and says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you're lusting is the one?